Welcome to Wednesday Walks Together. My name is Mark Long, rector of the parish of St Andrew in Newlands, Cape Town. I realized this morning that my experience of this pandemic and the lockdown we've experienced has not been dissimilar to my experience of national service in the mid-1980s. I was with the medical services and spent some time obviously in basics, then up in Oshakati in northern Southwest Africa at the time, Namibia today, and then Simonstown at the Navy Medical Center. Basics was a bit like level 5. One's rights were completely stripped away, one had absolutely no control, and the system controlled everything. Moving to Simonstown was a bit like shifting into level 2. Suddenly a whole lot of kind of rights were restored. Had an ability, certainly being in Cape Town, to get out and about, space and time to socialize, and an ability to kind of live life again, which I hadn't for the previous year, or hadn't felt I had for the previous year. Obviously, there are issues that go with national service. Being in the medics, I wasn't a conscientious objector, but I did ensure that after basics I was never issued with a rifle again, and was never actually in a combatant situation per se. It was certainly a time of beginning a conscientization process for me of the realities of the South African situation. And I learnt a huge deal in that, and that led to going into ministry and all the growth that's taken place in my life since then. But the reality of national service was that one really did, or I really felt imposed upon. And so one would jipper the system wherever one possibly could. One would certainly, and there was a kind of freedom to it in Cape Town, was able to kind of be AWOL from time to time without getting into any trouble for that. And abused the system where one could, because one felt really put upon. And I have a sense as I look around during this lockdown that we're responding similarly to the way many, certainly white South Africans, responded to the national service space that we were put in. And so challenges for us is, how do we cope with these times where we lose control over our lives? And level 2 at least is restoring a whole lot of what actually is just normal. But the restrictions are still there and we still feel those. One knows that some of it is for one's own protection. And perhaps that's the difference between national service and lockdown, is that one really is trying to protect oneself from a very real threat of a virus. That certainly wasn't the case when one thought through it carefully back in the 1980s. So how are you surviving all of this? I think questions of well-being, of wholeness, and how are we moving forward with it? I experienced high levels of anxiety, certainly in my early days in national service. Those decreased, and certainly moving to Simonstown helped that. And I suspect as we've moved from level 5 down to level 2, we're also feeling a little bit more in control, that we kind of know what this is more about now, and we're able to live with it. In the church, we're hoping to return to in-person worship in September. We'll have to keep some of our virtual worship opportunities going, but there will be an opportunity for us to gather again physically. And I know for many who've not been essential services or not been able to be out and about, just the thought of having to re-engage with people, let alone large groups of people, I suspect is a source of new anxiety going forward. And I would really encourage us as we shift into this new time to really trust in God's goodness and God's presence. And that ultimately to know that our lives are in God's hands. And as much as we like to control and direct, God is there to guide and to lead. And part of the challenge of this time for me has been really recognizing my need once again to be really reliant on the goodness of God in the midst of everything that we're living with. And so I'd really encourage you to reflect on just where you are, and if you are still experiencing high levels of anxiety or anxiety about the changes that are now taking place, just to really offer those to God and trust that God will come in and be the one that undergirds our lives and continues to hold us, and to trust that there is a future ahead, a good future ahead, that we can rebuild and move forward. Part of my personal time of prayer during this lockdown, as you've been aware, has been linked quite strongly to Padraig Otuma's work, and particularly his daily prayers with the Corrymeela community. And there's a phrase from the midday prayer, and I'd just like to share that with you. It reads as follows, or prays as follows. And this part of this is a prayer, of course, too, and directed at God. When we meet you, may we deepen trust, deepen life, deepen justice, and deepen joy. And that has been my prayer since the beginning of lockdown, that there would be that growing depth as I meet God in my daily life. And I pray that that may be true for us as a community here at St. Andrews, for those of you who link into this from beyond the community, for you as well, and maybe something that we as a church or as people of faith may really live out in deep ways. And my prayer is that this time of lockdown has forced us to reflect in new ways and to reconsider our lives and hopefully reconsider our relationship with God in that process. But the prayer for me, and I think what's so important, is that it highlights, or that particular phrase in the prayer or short verse in the prayer says or focuses on the importance of trust, life, justice, and joy. And my hope is that we would be restored in terms of our joy, because I think we've lost that. There's been a desolation that we've lived in, and hopefully a renewed sense of consolation will begin to develop and grow. We've also been very aware of the cracks in our society and the injustices, and an opportunity moving forward just in our own individual lives to begin to seek to live more justly. And I think we've also learnt to value life in a new way, and the fullness of that life and the relationships and everything that go with it. And a joy that under level 2, we can at least have greater ease of access to friends and to family. So I do really pray that all of that would be something that we're able to hold, and that we will know that in our encounters with God, with those we know and love, and even with strangers who come into our lives from time to time. So may God continue to walk with us and with you, and may we know that deep blessing that is God's goodness and God's love and God's peace and God's very life.